the number one thing that we'll talk about is not having a SQL maintenance plan. So what a SQL maintenance plan is, it's essentially like a it's like a task scheduler. So Windows has a task scheduler where you can automatically run commands, batch files, whatever it is, through that. There's also SOLIDWORKS has a task scheduler if you wanted to there's a task scheduler in SOLIDWORKS if you wanted to generate have SOLIDWORKS save out a bunch of PDFs or upgrade versions or kind of automate some tasks. It's the same thing with SQL. So for PDM standard, SOLIDWORKS PDM standard, it uses on the back end SQL Express, which doesn't have what they call a SQL Server agent, which is just a little service that runs automated tasks. And because it doesn't have that, you have to go through Windows Task Scheduler to create some automated backups. And we had one of our PDM specialists, Tyler Smith. He did a presentation on how to generate those backups with SQL Express. So if you want to take a look at the detailed how-to on generating those maintenance plans, well, SQL Express doesn't have maintenance plans, but if you wanted to learn how to generate those automatic backup files in SQL Express, he did a whole webinar that's posted on our website under tutorials on how to do that. But I want to just touch on the maintenance plan, what it is, how it works. So on a server where you've got PDM installed, whether it's PDM Standard or Pro, there's Microsoft SQL Server, Management Studio, which you can log into, and there's a couple things that you can do. This is for PDM Pro or Standard. You can generate on the fly if you wanted to back up, like you're about to do an upgrade from one version to another, from 15 to 16, and you wanted to manually create a backup. You can go in and find your database, which is one of these cylinders here, and generate a backup from there. But that only does it once. It's not automating that every day. So what you would want to do is set up a maintenance plan, an automated task that will go in and generate those backup files. So under Management and Maintenance, there's an area where you can go through a maintenance plan wizard, and essentially what it does is it creates a little automation. And there's plenty of documentation out there on how to create these maintenance plans, and I want to get into all the minutiae of how to create these, but you want to create a backup of the database. And what this does is it creates a little .bak file that is what you use to restore the database. So let's say that you were taking backups every night. That's a pretty typical time period where you're backing up the physical files and you're backing up the database itself, and you back that up every night. If you needed to restore, you'd copy your archive files and your database itself. The database is that .bak file that you restore, and it creates the database just how it was the day before. So database file, really important to back up, and if you're curious what it looks like, find it here. I thought I had my... Let's see where I've got that stored. If I can't find it real quick, it should be there. D drive, that's why. So backup files are going to look something like this, where it's generating that every day and gives you a little timestamp. So basically, takeaway there is that, pull that back up. Takeaway there is that if you don't have a SQL maintenance plan in place, you're not generating those .bak files. And so if you don't have that or you don't know, go ahead and ask IT. If you are unfamiliar with setting it up, you don't have as much of an IT department, you can ask our support to kind of help you walk through setting up a SQL maintenance plan and setting up backups. And we also have some documentation as well for PDM Standard and SQL Express. There is some documentation for SQL Express out there on setting up those automatic backups, but they can be kind of convoluted to work with, which is why our webinar with Tyler was really nice, because it basically talks about exactly what you need to do for PDM Standard. So remove some of that confusion. Another one that is in the top 10 is backups on the same drive as production. So let's say that you're backing up your database file, the .bak file, you're backing up the archive files, but that backup location is on the same drive as the drive that you're using in production. It's crazy, I know, but it has happened. So just making sure that you've got those backups on a different drive, and sometimes even a different manufacturer or different batch of drives, because sometimes if you have the same lot of hard drives, then they might fail at the same time, because they might fail because of the same issue. So having the big one out of that one is just making sure that you've got your backups on a separate drive, and then if you want to get a little bit more robust, you can make sure that those other drives are a different manufacturer, or they came from a different lot, a different grouping, so that they're not all going to fail at the same time. Corrupted database files, this is similar to what I was talking about with the maintenance plan. What happens here is sometimes the drive, the disk drive will fill up, and you won't get notified that, hey, your disk drive is filling up with files, or wherever you're sending your .bak file, it might get filled up. So there is a utility within the maintenance plan that can send you an email and let you know, hey, this drive has been filled up. So that's one of the options that you have within the maintenance plan wizard, is to set up an email. And we do have a document on that if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper into actually setting up that email. You can contact our support and they can send that over to you. But essentially it's another task within the maintenance plan that says, hey, if this file fails to generate for some reason, like the disk is too full or something, send the IT admin an email, or send me an email, or whatever it happens to be, something robust that you make sure that you're getting notified that, hey, that file didn't get generated for some reason. Editing the SQL tables. So this is another thing. Hopefully you haven't done this, but if you've had some sort of inkling, like, hey, I'm pretty savvy, I know SQL, I can go in and just edit this SQL table I would highly recommend against doing that, and I'll show you one example of why that would be a bad idea. So I'm going to take a look at one of the databases that we've got. This one's for PDM Professional, and let's say that I'm going in and updating a value in one of these tables. Well, in one of these tables, projects tables, for instance, if I were to edit one of these projects, like for example, each one of these represents a folder, and there's a folder path associated with it. What would happen is if I were to edit one of these items, one of these cells within this table, there's a trigger attached or connected to this particular table. And so when I make a change to this and save it, it's going to trigger that to update, and it will update all of these paths to the same thing with just a backslash. And so that will basically eliminate all my folder structure within the vault, which is really, really bad. So you can recover from that, but it takes a lot of work, and it's a pain. So when you're editing these tables, there's some implications to doing that you just want to avoid in general, that cause some real instability and issues. So if you're interested in SQL tables and that you think maybe there's one you want to update or something, please talk to support, and just generally try and stay away from it. Do everything you can to stay out of the SQL tables, because it has happened before. We've had customers that update tables and didn't realize that which tables affected the other ones. So manipulating the archive files. So if you remember our little discussion, you've got the SQL database, you've got the archive server itself, and let me pull that up here. So you got the archive server that's storing your physical files. You've got the database server that's storing all of the metadata and connections and references and all that kind of stuff. So if you are poking around on the server for some reason, there's a physical file location, a folder, on the server, usually in the same location. I've got mine, let's see here, PDM program files, SOLIDWORKS PDM data. So every vault that you've got has got a folder that has a hexadecimal folder format, 0 through F, and each file gets stored in one of these folders, and each version of that document gets stored in those folders. And so it's the database's job to say, hey, the file that lives in this folder on the archive server, that corresponds to this name in the database, that it's part 123 or it's an extension stand or whatever it is. And that name is what you see when you're browsing around in the vault, and then it gives it that name when it copies this file to your local cache, so that when you open in SOLIDWORKS it says that. But in order for the database to store things efficiently and for the tables to work efficiently, and it's basically how the system is architected to work efficiently, it stores these files in the same location, so they're not moving around on the back end. So if you were to go into one of these folders and delete basically anything, you're permanently deleting that physical archive file. And so you don't want to move these documents around, you don't want to delete them, you don't want to give access to this folder to anyone. I had something similar happen with a workgroup vault where the customer had allowed everyone to access the vault data folder, which is workgroup's kind of equivalent to this folder where all the data is stored. And some of the files got corrupted because somebody had gone in there and messed with that particular folder, didn't know what they were doing. So don't give that folder location out, don't make that editable for end users only administrators on that server. So just word of caution there. Asynchronous backup. So this happens once again with things that are mistimed. You're taking the database backup at an inopportune time. Let's say that you take a database backup during the middle of the day, but somebody was checking in an assembly with a bunch of references. You might have initiated the backup and they had checked in the archive files. They had checked in their assembly right after that backup, and so the database doesn't know that those files exist there in the archive server. And the same thing can happen if you take the database or take the archive server backup. You back those SOLIDWORKS files up, and then you don't take the database backup until like 4 hours later. There can be a discrepancy between the two. So the database either doesn't know that the archive file exists, or the archive file doesn't know that there's a database entry in PDM, so it doesn't seem to exist. So the takeaway there is to make sure that the backups are happening at the same time. And typically that happens in off hours like midnight or something where users aren't working. It comes into play a little bit more when you're working with multiple sites across multiple locations. And you've got kind of overlapping hours where midnight might be when someone else is coming in. So making sure that that time period when those backups are being taken, that there's not a lot of changes happening, or really any changes happening. No one's checking in documents or checking out or updating any information in the system, so that you have an accurate snapshot in time of those files. So those are kind of a little more IT heavy, where they're talking about SQL backups, but even though it is IT, it's really important for the engineering team to make sure that the IT infrastructure is there, that they've got the backups in place, that SQL is getting backed up properly, and that you're not running out of disk space for the SQL backups. And just kind of maintaining those backups is a really important part. And once again, it sounds common, but and maybe too obvious, but these are here for a reason. We've encountered them before. Other folks from SOLIDWORKS have encountered them before. These are probably the worst things that can happen to a vault, is to not have a database backup or not have the archive files, because there's not much that you can do from there. But in regards to settings, admin settings, this is a little bit more heavy into the admin tool itself. There's a few different settings that are there, such as destroy, rollback. There's other things to think about as well, add-ins and cold storage, but let's talk about destroy. So when you're in a Vault view and you want to delete a file, let's see, let's find a good location, being professional. If you want to delete a file within the Vault, maybe I've got a document here like this text document, I can do a deletion in one of two ways. I can delete it or I can destroy it. And a destroy bypasses the recycle bin. So if you're not aware of the recycle bin itself within PDM, here's a little nugget for you. If you right-click on a folder and go to Properties, there's a tab on the far right called Deleted Items, and that has all of your, it's basically your recycle bin for that folder. So anything that's ever been deleted out of the sales folder in this case, anything that's ever been deleted out of there but not destroyed, that'll show up as an item that's been put to that particular recycle bin. If you want to look at the whole vault, you can do that by clicking on the properties in Windows Explorer at the vault root level, the name of the vault essentially. And there's a deleted items tab in there, and if you want to see everything ever, you can click on that include items in subfolder, and it'll show up all those documents that have been deleted. So in case you didn't know that, that's where the recycled files go. But if you click Shift Delete on a file, it's going to bypass that recycle bin altogether. And users might not know that, but you can accidentally click Shift and Delete on the keyboard. And so to prevent users from bypassing that recycle bin, there's a setting in the user settings and as well as the group settings that allows you to control who's allowed to destroy files. So within the folder permissions, there's an option in there called destroy. And typically I recommend not giving that out. If a user really needs to destroy something or get rid of it completely, they can do that by requesting that from the admin. But in general, I'm very reticent and hesitant to give out that destroy permission, just because if they do delete a file, you at least have the option to go into that recycle bin and restore it. So that makes it more recoverable. Another option that you have in the PDM admin tool is this thing called rollback. And what rollback does is, let's see the folder permissions here, there's a setting called rollback. What rollback does is it allows you to do kind of like an undo of something that you've changed. Let's say that you updated a revision of a document, you went from Rev A to Rev B, and that change from Rev A to Rev B, you really, you didn't mean to. It was, you approved the change, but you shouldn't have. You got some feedback from manufacturing, whatever the case may be, and you need to pull that back. You need to take it back to revision A and act as if revision B never existed. Well, there's an option to do that, and that's called rollback. And the way that that's accessed for users is when they go into the file history and they select on a previous version, they can copy that version to their local hard drive via a get, or if they needed to, let's say I created version 3 in this case, but it was the wrong version, I made changes that I wasn't supposed to, it needs to go back to version 2, there's an option that appears for version 2 that says rollback, and what that will do is it'll delete version 3 altogether. So that's useful if you make a change that you weren't supposed to, and you need to make a comment that says, hey, this was rolled back for this reason. You can do that, and it will roll it back, and it'll say, hey, version 3 was removed. There might be a comment as to why, but that deletes the file itself, and it also deletes that entry in the database for that version. So that's kind of a really powerful tool that can remove documents from the vault. So you want to be very careful with who has permissions to do that. And my recommendation is that users and groups do not have that permission to roll back a file by default. Just by default, they don't have destroy, they don't have rollback. So that creates a scenario in which the user must request from the admin, hey, I need to roll this back, or hey, I need to destroy this file, so that you can kind of evaluate whether that's legitimate or not, and that you don't run into an accidental rollback or an accidental destroy. Because a user might think rollback means, hey, I want to look at that old version, and they accidentally delete. So I just generally don't give out those permissions. I would avoid those in general so that you're not creating opportunities for those files to get removed from the vault. Last two items that we want to talk about are removing an add-in when you're upgrading from version to version, either service pack to service pack or major version to major version of SOLIDWORKS PDM, and cold storage deletions. So the add-ins that you might use, there's a few different ones. You might have some custom ones, some Hawkware that I've got. and there's an add-in called SOLIDWORKS Task Add-in, and if you've ever used the task that automatically creates PDFs, you go to that task and you're going to find that it uses the SOLIDWORKS Task Add-in to generate those PDFs or step files or e-drawings or whatever it is that you're generating automatically in your workflow with PDM Professional. So when you're upgrading from major version to version, you're going to see next to the name of the add-in 2016-04. That means it's SOLIDWORKS PDM 2016 Service Pack 4. That tells me the version of that. You can see that this dispatch add-in that I have is from SP1 of 2016 because it's 2016-01. So when you're updating the PDF task add-in, the thing that you want to avoid is removing that task add-in and then adding it in again with the new version, because you'll lose the any kind of custom settings that you've put into the convert to PDF. So the recommended way to do that is to go into the installation files and find, let's see, where's my installation files real quick, C drive. And default data. Every version comes with dispatch and this convert _GB. The GB is for Great Britain because of English language. But essentially what this is it's replacing task add-in and replacing it with the new version so that you're not removing that task. You're not removing the settings you have set up. You're actually just replacing that task add-in file. But you'll want to make sure that you've got your backups in place before you do any of these kinds of version upgrades anyway, just in case you need to go back to a previous version. So take backups before upgrading, take backups before adjusting something like the task add-in, and you'll have that in place to have a point where you can go back to. So you want to be careful with that as well, because you might lose some settings. And then the last item that we want to talk about is cold storage. So cold storage is a really useful tool. What it does is it says, all right, I've got a lot of extra versions. I may make 20 changes in between Rev A and Rev B, and I don't really need all those in-between copies, those in-between versions sitting on my hard drive. It's taking up space. I need to clear out some items. So there's a few different options within cold storage. You can either archive those or delete them entirely. So under cold storage, you can create a new cold storage schema and you can say, hey, I either want to delete the archive files, so those archive files are those physical files, the PDF, the SOLIDWORKS document, those kinds of things, or I can move them to another folder if I'm sending them to tape backups or something that are going somewhere else and we'll need to get them from the repository if we ever need them in the future. But there's an option in there to delete the archive files. So you want to make sure that you're not deleting everything. You understand which versions you're keeping. So for example, you might want to make sure that you're always keeping the major revisions of the file, and you want to keep the last 10 versions of that file. So basically the danger here is if you don't set these settings properly and you delete some of the versions. Let's say that you needed version 11 but you only kept 10, or you forgot to check this box, or it's checked by default but you unchecked it and you deleted some revisions of the file. That can be a dangerous thing because you can't recover those deleted files. So those are the kind of top 10 kind of some of the more severe, unrecoverable things that can happen to you as you're administering a vault. So once again, just kind of going through this top 10. 1 through 6 kind of have to do with backups, making sure that you've got your SQL backups in place, that you're thinking well about not putting those on the same drive as the production vault, making sure you've got an automatic email set up to tell you if the drive is full so that it can't create those backup files. Don't edit the SQL tables. Don't manipulate the archive files themselves. Make sure that the backups are on the same schedule so they're getting taken at the same time. They represent the same point in time. They're not on different schedules. Removing a default permission to not allow people to destroy files, not allow them to do a rollback on a file. Removing the add-in without actually replacing it. And then using cold storage to delete files. Those would be, in terms of my own personal opinion, those would be the most severe things that could ruin a vault or remove important data or take a really long time to get you back up and running if you did encounter some of these issues. Because there was no SQL maintenance plan, or there's no someone edited the SQL tables, those kinds of things. So with that, I want to go ahead and thank you for attending our webinar. Hopefully it was a useful webinar for you. You learned something. Hopefully the takeaway is there to check your backups, make sure that you've got a backup plan in place. If you don't, talk to our technical support and they can help you out, and if there's kind of a need for some consulting, we can do that as well. We have a lot of expertise in this area to be able to help you evaluate your current disaster recovery scenarios and if it's adequate or not. So with that, I'll go ahead and take a look at some of the questions we've got.